At her wedding, my daughter-in-law demanded my house. A young family needs this house more. I said no, and she slapped me. So I picked up the phone and dialed a number. 20 minutes later, 2 men arrived, and my daughter-in-law started crying. She had been exposed. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The front door slammed against the wall with such force that I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Paul burst through like a hurricane, his face flushed with excitement, practically vibrating with energy. "Dad, you're not going to believe what just happened." He was pacing before I could even set my mug down, pulling something small from his jacket pocket. "I did it. I actually did it." My stomach dropped when I saw the velvet box, deep navy blue, expensive looking, the kind that held promises and futures and life-changing decisions. "Paul, slow down." I reached for the dish towel, needing something to do with my hands. "What exactly did you do?" "I proposed." He flipped open the box, revealing a diamond that caught the kitchen light like captured starlight. "Marilyn said, 'Yes, Dad. We're engaged.'" The words hit me like cold water. 3 months. He'd known this woman for exactly 3 months, and now he was talking about marriage like it was buying a new car. "Son, I forced my voice to stay level. "That's wonderful news. Really wonderful." But my mind was racing. Marilyn Hayes, the bartender from downtown who looked at my house like she was calculating square footage, who answered her phone during family dinners and spoke to me like I was some doddering old fool. "Look at this ring." Paul thrust the box toward me, his grin so wide it probably hurt. 2 carats, platinum setting. Cost me my entire savings, but she deserves the best. His entire savings. Every penny he'd scraped together from his programming job, gone in one impulsive gesture. I examined the ring, noting how the diamond seemed almost too perfect, too brilliant, like everything else about Marilyn. "It's beautiful, Paul. When did you propose?" "Tonight, at Giuseppe's. You know, that Italian place where we had our second date." He was bouncing on his feet like a kid on Christmas morning. "I had it all planned out. Got down on one knee right there in front of everyone. She cried, 'Dad.' Actually cried tears of joy." "I'll bet she did. Tears of pure financial relief, more likely." "Paul, can we sit down for a minute?" I gestured toward the kitchen table. "This is big news. Life-changing news. I know, right?" He finally stopped pacing and dropped into his usual chair. "I can't believe I'm actually going to be married. Marilyn Duncan. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" "It does." I sat across from him, choosing my words carefully. "But son, you've only known each other 3 months. Are you sure you know her well enough for such a big step?" The light in his eyes dimmed slightly. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean marriage is a serious commitment. It's not just about love, it's about compatibility, shared values, long-term goals." I leaned forward, keeping my voice gentle. "Have you two talked about children, money, where you want to live?" "Of course we have." His tone was getting defensive. "We want the same things, Dad. Family, happiness, a good life together." "And money? Have you discussed finances?" Paul's jaw tightened. "Why are you asking about money?" "Because your fiancé sized up my house like a real estate appraiser, I thought. Because she asked pointed questions about my retirement savings within an hour of meeting me. Because everything about her screams, gold digger. I'm just saying, son, financial compatibility is important. You're a programmer, she's a bartender. Different worlds, different incomes. So what?" Paul's voice was rising now. "Are you saying she's beneath me because of her job?" "No, that's not what I'm saying at all." I held up my hands, trying to calm the storm I could see building in his face. "I'm saying you need to make sure you're on the same page about expectations." We're on the same page." He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "She loves me, Dad, and I love her. That's what matters." But I couldn't let it go. Not when I could see the disaster coming like a freight train. "Paul, she seems presumptuous to me. Disrespectful. Have you noticed how she talks to me when she thinks you're not listening?" "Don't you dare!" His voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare talk about her like that. You barely know her." "But I see how she treats me, how she speaks to me in my own home." The words were coming faster now, fueled by months of watching this woman manipulate my son. "She looks at everything here like she's already moved in, like she's calculating what it's all worth." Paul's face went white, then red. "Stop it. Just stop it right now." Son, I've been around long enough to recognize— Enough! He slammed his palm against the table, making the salt shaker jump. I'm a grown man. Stop interfering in my life. Paul, please. I'm just trying to— No! He was backing toward the door now, his face twisted with anger and hurt. I'm done listening to your judgments. You want to know what I think? I think you're jealous that I found someone who makes me happy. That's not true, and you know it. Is it? Because ever since Mom died, you've been alone, and now you can't stand the thought of me having what you lost. The words hit me like a physical blow. Paul immediately looked stricken, like he couldn't believe what had just come out of his mouth. Paul, wait! But he was already at the door, yanking it open. I'm done with this conversation. Marilyn and I are getting married whether you approve or not. The door slammed with such force that the windows rattled. I stood there in the sudden silence, listening to his car engine roar to life in the driveway. Gravel crunched as he backed out too fast, tires squealing as he disappeared down the street. The kitchen felt impossibly quiet now, just the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock. I looked down and realized my hands were shaking. I stood there staring at the door for several minutes after Paul's taillights disappeared. The silence pressed against my eardrums like water. Finally, I forced myself to move, gathering up our coffee mugs with mechanical precision. His mug was still warm. I held it longer than necessary, remembering how he used to drink hot chocolate from this same cup when he was 10 years old, marshmallows melting into sweet spirals on the surface. The living room felt too big as I settled into my leather armchair. It was the same chair where I'd held him during thunderstorms, where we'd watched Cubs games on lazy Sundays, where I'd explained the facts of life with all the awkward sincerity a widowed father could muster. Now I'd probably ruined everything. Maybe I really had overstepped. The words echoed in my head like accusations. Paul was 28 years old, educated, capable of making his own decisions. What right did I have to question his choices? But those eyes. Marilyn's calculating eyes sweeping across my living room like she was already rearranging the furniture. The way she'd asked about my retirement plans during their second visit, her voice honey-sweet but her interest razor-sharp. I reached for the photo album on the side table, my fingers finding the familiar worn edges. Martha smiled up at me from the first page, her arm around a teenage Paul at his high school graduation. She'd been gone 5 years now, but I still caught myself setting two places at the dinner table sometimes. What would you do, Martha? I whispered to her photograph. What would you tell me? But I already knew. Martha had been the wise one, the diplomat. She would have found a way to voice concerns without triggering an explosion. She would have invited Marilyn for coffee, drawn her out with gentle questions, made her own judgment without alienating our son. I turned the page and found my own young face staring back at me. 25 years old, standing next to my first wife, Rebecca. God, I'd been so certain then, so absolutely convinced that her smile meant love, that her interest in my engineering prospects was genuine affection. The marriage lasted 18 months, long enough for her to realize that junior engineers didn't make as much money as she'd hoped, long enough for her to find someone with better financial prospects, long enough to teach me that some people view marriage as a business transaction. I'd sworn I'd never be that naive again. But here was Paul, making the exact same mistake with the exact same type of woman. The similarities were uncanny. Rebecca had been charming, vivacious, always ready with a laugh and a compliment. She'd made me feel like the most interesting man in the world, right up until she didn't. Marilyn had that same practiced charm, the way she touched Paul's arm when she laughed, the way she gazed at him like he'd hung the moon. But I'd seen her face when she thought no one was looking. Cold calculation, measuring everything against some internal profit margin. I closed the album and rubbed my eyes. Maybe Paul was right. Maybe I was jealous, afraid of losing the only family I had left. Maybe grief had made me paranoid, suspicious of anyone who threatened to change our small, comfortable world. But I didn't think so. This wasn't about loneliness or fear of abandonment. This was about protecting my son from a woman who saw dollar signs where he saw love. The question was, how could I make him see it without pushing him further away? I made my way to the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. The ritual was soothing, selecting the cup, measuring the leaves, waiting for the water to boil. By the time I sat down with the steaming mug, I'd made my decision. Tomorrow, I would call Paul. I would apologize for my timing, for my delivery, for making him feel attacked in what should have been a moment of celebration. I would invite them both for dinner, create an opportunity to observe Marilyn more closely without seeming confrontational. And if I was wrong about her, if she truly loved my son for who he was, rather than what he could provide, I would be the first to welcome her into our family. But if I was right, I sipped my tea and began planning exactly what I would say. Paul needed to hear humility, not judgment. He needed to feel respected, not criticized. And Marilyn needed to feel welcome enough to reveal her true nature. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times, late enough that Paul would be home by now, probably telling Marilyn about our fight, probably painting me as the interfering old man who couldn't accept his happiness. Let him. For now, it was better that she underestimate me. I finished my tea and headed upstairs, already composing the apology I would deliver in the morning. The right words at the right time could heal the rift between us, and once Paul and I were solid again, I could focus on protecting him from the woman who was counting his money, before she'd even said, "I do." I woke at dawn without the alarm, my mind immediately focused on the task ahead. Coffee first, then the call. I needed caffeine to steady my nerves and clarity to choose the right words. Standing at the kitchen counter, I rehearsed out loud like an actor preparing for the most important performance of his life. Son, I want to apologize. Too formal. Paul, I'm sorry about last night. Too simple. I was wrong to interfere. Too much. I pulled out a notepad and wrote down key points. Respect his decision. Support his happiness. Request second chance. Keep it brief. 8 o'clock felt too early. 8:15 seemed pushy. By 8:30, I was pacing circles around the kitchen table, checking my watch every 30 seconds. Finally, I grabbed the phone. First ring, second ring. Third. Hello? Paul's voice was flat, professional, distant. Paul, it's Dad. I was hoping we could talk. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. Then, I really don't have time for another lecture about my life choices. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a full minute, then dialed again. Paul, please don't hang up. Click. On the third attempt, he answered with pure exasperation. What do you want? More insults for Marilyn? More reasons why I'm making a mistake? Son, I want to apologize. The words rushed out before he could disconnect again. I shouldn't have interfered in your personal life. You're a grown man, and you have the right to make your own choices. I was completely out of line. The silence this time felt different, surprised rather than hostile. You're apologizing? Yes, absolutely. What I said last night was unfair and hurtful, and I'm deeply sorry. I gripped the phone tighter. You came to share wonderful news, and I turned it into an argument. That was wrong of me. Well, his voice lost some of its edge. I wasn't expecting that. I love you, Paul. Your happiness matters more to me than anything else in the world. If Marilyn makes you happy, then I want to support that relationship. I could hear him breathing, processing. In the background, a voice, Marilyn, asked something I couldn't make out. Okay, he said finally. Maybe we can actually talk like adults then. I'd like that very much. I took a deep breath. In fact, I was hoping you'd both come for dinner tomorrow night. I'd like the chance to get to know Marilyn better, to start over on the right foot. Hold on. The phone muffled as he covered it with his hand. I caught fragments of conversation. Dinner at Dad's. Wants to apologize. Second chance. When he came back, his voice was cautiously optimistic. She says yes. Tomorrow at 6? Perfect. I'll make your favorite. Pot roast with those carrots you used to steal from the pan. For the first time since he'd burst through my door last night, Paul laughed. Actually laughed. I haven't had your pot roast in months. Marilyn's excited to try it. Wonderful. And Paul, thank you for giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it. Yeah, well, you're my dad. We figure things out. After we hung up, I sat in the sudden quiet, relief washing over me like warm water. Phase 1 complete. The relationship was salvaged, the dinner invitation accepted. Now came the real challenge, hosting Marilyn Hayes in my home, observing her closely enough to confirm my suspicions without appearing to do exactly that. I opened the notepad to a fresh page and began planning the menu. Pot roast, obviously. Martha's recipe for honey-glazed carrots. The good china from the dining room cabinet. Wine, something that would encourage conversation and perhaps lower Marilyn's guard. Most importantly, I needed to create an atmosphere where she would feel comfortable enough to reveal her true nature. Warm but not obviously welcoming. Interested but not intrusive. I had less than 30 hours to prepare the perfect trap. I spent the morning reviewing my handwritten grocery list, the pen marks dark against the yellow notepad, prime rib roast, fresh carrots, Yukon Gold potatoes, the ingredients for a meal that would either rebuild our family or confirm my worst fears about Marilyn. The drive to Whole Foods took exactly 5 minutes through the quiet Evanston streets. March air still carried winter's bite, but spring was fighting back with tiny green buds on the maple trees lining my route. Inside the store, I moved methodically through each aisle. The meat counter first, where I selected a 3-pound prime rib roast that would feed us generously. The butcher, a young man with calloused hands, wrapped it carefully in white paper. "Special occasion?" he asked, noting the quality of the cut. "Family dinner," I replied. "My son's bringing his fiancée." Fresh vegetables came next, carrots with their greens still attached, indicating recent harvest. Baby potatoes that would roast perfectly alongside the beef. Brussels sprouts that I'd prepare with bacon, knowing Paul had loved them since childhood. The wine section required more consideration, something welcoming but not presumptuous. A modest Cabernet from Napa Valley caught my attention, good enough to show effort, not so expensive as to seem like I was trying too hard. Back home, I surveyed my domain with fresh eyes. The house needed attention if I wanted to make the right impression, not for Marilyn's sake, but for Paul's. This was his home, too, the place where he'd grown up, and it should reflect the warmth he remembered. I started with the living room, dusting each family photograph with careful precision. Martha and Paul at his college graduation. The 3 of us on vacation in Michigan when Paul was 12. My parents' wedding portrait from 1955. Their faces serious, but hopeful. The dining room required Martha's good china, the Lenox pattern we'd received as a wedding gift 37 years ago. Each plate emerged from the cabinet wrapped in tissue paper, pristine white with delicate gold trim. I set 3 places with mathematical precision, measuring the distance between fork and knife with an engineer's attention to detail. The roast went into the oven at 3:30, seasoned with rosemary and garlic. 3 hours at low temperature would yield the medium rare perfection Paul preferred. The kitchen filled with savory aromas that transported me back to Sunday dinners when Martha was alive, when our table was always set for 3. While the meat cooked, I prepared the vegetables, carrots peeled and cut into uniform pieces, potatoes halved and tossed with olive oil and sea salt, Brussels sprouts cleaned and trimmed, ready for their final saute, with bacon bits. The mashed potatoes would be last, whipped with butter and cream exactly the way Martha used to make them. Paul had always insisted they were better than any restaurants, a compliment that had made his mother beam with pride. By 5 o'clock, everything was progressing perfectly. The roast's internal temperature climbed steadily toward the target. The vegetables waited in their preparation bowls. The wine breathed on the counter beside 3 glasses. I changed into a fresh shirt, navy blue cotton that Martha had always said brought out my eyes. In the bathroom mirror, I practiced expressions of welcome, trying to find the balance between genuine warmth and forced enthusiasm. The house felt ready. Candles flickered on the dining room table. The living room looked inviting without being formal. The kitchen smelled like home. At 5:50, I checked the wall clock one final time. 10 minutes until they arrived. 10 minutes to prepare myself for whatever Marilyn would bring to my table tonight. Outside, a car door slammed. They were early. I opened the front door just as Paul reached for the doorbell, his finger hovering over the button. Behind him, Marilyn smoothed her dress with one hand, while clutching a small clutch purse with the other. "Perfect timing," I said, stepping aside to welcome them in. "You're right on schedule." Paul embraced me with genuine warmth. The lingering tension from our argument finally dissolved. "Dad, something smells incredible in here. Is that your famous pot roast?" "Prime rib tonight," I corrected, hanging their coats in the front closet. "I thought we'd celebrate properly." "Oh my!" Marilyn's voice carried a theatrical quality that immediately set my teeth on edge. Look at this adorable little house. So old-fashioned, but I suppose it has character. Little house. The 4-bedroom colonial that Martha and I had saved 3 years to buy was hardly little, but I managed to smile. We have even more incredible news. Paul's excitement bubbled over as we moved toward the living room. We've set the date, April 15th, just 4 weeks away. April 15th? I tried to keep the surprise from my voice. That's quite soon. When you know, you know, Marilyn said, displaying her engagement ring prominently as she gestured. No point in waiting around, right? Congratulations, I managed. That's wonderful news indeed. We settled into the living room, where Marilyn immediately began cataloging the furniture with calculating eyes. Her gaze lingered on Martha's antique secretary desk, the Persian rug we'd bought for our 10th anniversary, the grandfather clock that had belonged to my father. This furniture is so vintage, she observed. I bet some of these pieces are worth something at auction. Paul laughed nervously. Marilyn's got an eye for antiques. She's always watching those appraisal shows. How interesting, I replied, though interesting wasn't the word I'd have chosen. Dinner service provided a welcome distraction. I carved the prime rib with ceremonial precision, the meat falling in perfect pink slices. The vegetables glistened with butter and herbs. The wine poured like liquid ruby into our glasses. This looks lovely, Paul said, settling into his chair, just like Mom used to make. Well, not exactly like Mom used to make, Marilyn corrected, cutting the small piece of beef. She probably had better knives. This is a little tough to cut. I watched her chew thoughtfully, her expression suggesting she was finding the meal wanting. She continued after swallowing. A bit dry, isn't it? Paul always talks about what a great cook you are, but restaurant quality is so much more consistent. Perhaps I overcooked it slightly, I replied evenly. I'll adjust the timing next time. Oh, there'll be a next time? Her laugh tinkled like breaking glass. How sweet! Though honestly, Paul and I will probably be too busy with married life to visit much. Paul shifted uncomfortably. Marilyn, we'll still have Sunday dinners here sometimes. Maybe, she said, her attention already wandering to the family photographs on the sideboard. That's your late wife in all these pictures? Such a shame she won't see the wedding. Really unfortunate timing on her part. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Paul's fork clattered against his plate. Marilyn, that's not appropriate, he said quietly. What? I'm just saying it's sad timing. If she'd hung on a few more years, she could have met me. Marilyn's voice carried no trace of awareness that she'd said anything wrong. This house must feel so empty without her. All these memories everywhere, like living in a museum. I gripped my wineglass tighter, feeling the crystal stem flex slightly under pressure. The memories are precious, I said carefully. They make the house feel full, not empty. If you say so. She poked at her Brussels sprouts with obvious distaste. These vegetables are a bit overcooked, too. And what is this green stuff? Looks like tiny cabbages. Brussels sprouts, Paul explained. You said you liked them when we had them at that bistro downtown. Those were different. These taste like sulfur. The conversation limped through dessert. Vanilla ice cream with fresh berries that Marilyn declared store-bought quality. She critiqued the coffee as too weak, the lighting as too dim, even the classical music playing softly in the background as depressing funeral music. By 8:30, I was mentally exhausted from maintaining my composure. Every comment felt like a calculated test, as if she were deliberately pushing boundaries to see how much I would tolerate. Well, Paul said finally, glancing at his watch, we should probably head out. Early day tomorrow. Yes, Marilyn agreed, standing and smoothing her dress again. This has been educational. I walked them to the front door, helping Paul with the coats, while Marilyn checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. Thank you for the lovely dinner, Paul said, embracing me again. Everything was delicious, despite what? He glanced at Marilyn with mild frustration. Drive safely, I replied. Good night, both of you. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving me alone with the wreckage of what should have been a pleasant family dinner. I stood in the entryway for several minutes after their car disappeared down the street, my mind replaying every calculated insult Marilyn had delivered with surgical precision. The woman had turned a simple family dinner into an endurance test. Moving back to the dining room, I began clearing the table mechanically. Paul's plate was nearly empty. He'd managed to enjoy the meal despite his fiancé's constant criticisms. Marilyn's portion remained largely untouched, the prime rib cooling in congealed juices. As I reached for her chair to push it under the table, something caught my eye. A small black object wedged between the seat cushion and the armrest. Her phone. I picked it up carefully, intending to set it on the kitchen counter until I could call them. The screen was dark, but as my thumb brushed across it accidentally, it blazed to life with an incoming text message. The sender's name stopped my heart. Floyd. The message preview was clearly visible. Missing you tonight, beautiful. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Before I could process this fully, another message appeared from the same contact. Hope your work dinner isn't too boring. Work dinner. She'd told this Floyd person that she was at a work dinner, not a family dinner with her fiancé's father. The heart emoji next to his name suggested a relationship far beyond professional. My hands trembled slightly as I set the phone down on the dining room table. Everything I'd suspected about Marilyn was true, but this was worse than simple gold digging. She was actively deceiving multiple people, living parallel lives that somehow never intersected. Outside, I heard the distinctive sound of Paul's car returning up the driveway. They'd realized the phone was missing. Quickly, I moved the phone to the kitchen counter, trying to arrange my expression into something approaching normal. The front door opened before I could fully compose myself. "Dad, sorry to bother you again," Paul called out, slightly breathless. "Marilyn forgot her phone somewhere." "Oh, here it is," I replied, retrieving it from the counter. "I just found it and was about to call you." "Thank you so much," Marilyn said, hurrying toward me with obvious anxiety. "I'm always forgetting that silly thing." But her eyes were sharp, calculating, searching my face for any sign that I might have seen something I shouldn't have. I kept my expression neutral, offering the phone with a steady hand. "No problem at all," I said. "Technology, right? We're all slaves to these devices." "Right," she laughed, but the sound was forced. "Well, thanks again. Dinner was interesting." They left again, and this time I watched through the living room window until their taillights completely disappeared around the corner. Only then did I allow myself to sink into my leather armchair, the weight of discovery settling over me like a heavy blanket. Floyd with a heart emoji. A Floyd who missed her, who thought she was at a work dinner instead of meeting her future father-in-law. The casual intimacy of the messages suggested a relationship that had been going on for some time, certainly longer than her 3-month romance with Paul. How many others were there? How elaborate was the web of deception she'd constructed around my naive son? Paul needed to know, but he would never believe me based on one glimpse text message. He was too deeply in love, too committed to the fantasy of their perfect romance. I needed more evidence, concrete proof that even his romantic idealism couldn't dismiss. I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, surrounded by the detritus of our disastrous dinner, and began planning my next move. If Marilyn Hayes thought she could manipulate her way into my family and destroy my son's life, she was about to learn how wrong she was. Some battles required patience, strategy, and careful planning. As an engineer, I understood the value of thorough investigation before taking action. The war for Paul's future had officially begun. My bedroom felt like a prison cell after I climbed the stairs at 10:30. The events of the evening played on endless repeat behind my closed eyelids. Marilyn's calculated insults, Paul's blind devotion, and those damning text messages that confirmed every suspicion I'd harbored. I rolled from my back to my left side, then to my right, checking the digital clock every few minutes. 11:47 p.m. The numbers glowed accusingly in the darkness. Floyd with a heart emoji. The intimacy of that simple symbol said everything about their relationship. No casual friend, no distant cousin would text with that level of familiarity. And work dinner, she'd lied to him about tonight, calling our family dinner a work obligation. Throwing off the covers, I padded downstairs to the kitchen. Sleep was impossible when my mind raced through possibilities like a computer processing data. I made coffee despite the late hour, needing the ritual more than the caffeine. The kitchen table became my command center. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and drew a line down the middle. On the left side, known facts. On the right, suspected facts. Known. Floyd sends intimate messages. Marilyn lies about her whereabouts. She's manipulative and materialistic. Suspected. Floyd believes he's in an exclusive relationship. There may be others. The engagement is a calculated move for financial security. But suspicions wouldn't convince Paul. He was too deeply in love, too committed to his fantasy of their perfect romance. I needed concrete evidence. Photographs, witnesses, documented proof that even his romantic idealism couldn't dismiss. At 1:30 a.m., I began planning my investigation strategy. Murphy's Tavern on North Clark Street. I'd heard Marilyn mention it during dinner conversation weeks ago. That would be my starting point. I could observe her work schedule, document her interactions, follow her after hours. The methodical part of my engineer's brain kicked into high gear, creating timelines and logistics. By 3 a.m., I had a preliminary plan sketched out. I would position myself across from the tavern during her shifts, using coffee shops and bus stops as cover. I'd invest in a small camera with a zoom lens, keep detailed written logs with timestamps. The investigation would need to be thorough but discreet. Marilyn was cunning enough to spot obvious surveillance, and I couldn't risk alerting her to my suspicions before gathering sufficient evidence. Paul's wedding was April 15th, exactly 4 weeks away. That gave me a month to build an airtight case, or accept that I'd been wrong about her. As dawn crept through the kitchen windows, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Martha's final illness, a sense of purpose that transcended my own comfort. This wasn't about my dislike of Marilyn or fear of losing Paul. This was about protecting my son from a woman who would destroy his life piece by piece. I set my alarm for 7 a.m. and finally attempted sleep, knowing that tomorrow would begin the most important investigation of my life. The first week taught me that detective work was far more tedious than television suggested. Murphy's Tavern sat on a busy corner of North Clark Street, surrounded by coffee shops and retail stores that provided perfect observation points. Marilyn worked Tuesday through Saturday, arriving promptly at 4 p.m. and leaving around midnight. I positioned myself in different locations each day, a bus stop bench on Tuesday, a corner cafe on Wednesday, rotating to avoid detection. March 20th brought my first major discovery. At 12:15 a.m., as Marilyn emerged from the tavern's employee entrance, a white pickup truck pulled to the curb. The driver, a man in his 30s wearing a mechanic's uniform, jumped out and embraced her with unmistakable intimacy. I managed 3 photographs before they drove away. The embrace, their faces clearly visible, and the truck's license plate. That night, I started my official log. March 20th, subject met by white male, approximately 30 years old, mechanic clothing, public display of affection lasting approximately 3 minutes. Departed together in white Ford F-150, license plate JMK8847. By March 25th, I'd established that this man, who I learned was named Floyd, through overheard conversations, appeared every Tuesday and Thursday night. Their routine was consistent. He waited outside the tavern, they embraced warmly and left together in his truck. But March 27th shattered my understanding of the situation entirely. At 12:10 a.m., as I sat in my car across the street, a different vehicle approached the tavern, a silver Honda Civic, driven by a different man, taller, wearing retail store clothing, completely unfamiliar. Marilyn emerged and greeted this new man with the same intimate affection she'd shown Floyd, same duration of embrace, same obvious romantic familiarity. They drove away together toward a different part of the city. I sat stunned in my car for 10 minutes, processing what I'd witnessed. Not one affair, but 2, possibly more. Over the following weeks, the pattern became clear. Floyd appeared on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The second man, whom I eventually identified as Leroy Smith through social media research, collected her on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Mondays and Fridays, she went home alone, probably to maintain the illusion of availability for Paul. My documentation grew methodical and comprehensive. Photographs of both men, their vehicles, their license plates. I followed each to their respective apartments, noting addresses and work locations. Floyd worked at Henderson's Auto Repair on Milwaukee Avenue. Leroy managed a sporting goods store in Lincoln Park. Both men appeared genuinely devoted to Marilyn. I observed Floyd bringing her flowers, Leroy carrying what appeared to be expensive jewelry boxes. Neither showed any awareness of the other's existence. Meanwhile, Marilyn maintained her engagement to Paul with seamless deception. I watched her answer his calls during her breaks, saw her examining wedding dress magazines during slow periods at the bar. By April 10th, my evidence file contained 47 photographs, 3 weeks of detailed written observations, and complete background information on both Floyd Brown and Leroy Smith. Two decent men being systematically deceived by a woman who viewed relationships as financial opportunities. The wedding was 5 days away. Paul had spent the past month in blissful preparation, discussing honeymoon plans and apartment hunting for their married life together. On April 14th, I sat in my study reviewing the complete file one final time. 27 days of surveillance had revealed a web of deception so elaborate it bordered on sociopathic. Marilyn wasn't just cheating on Paul, she was maintaining 3 separate relationships with military precision. Tomorrow, Paul would stand at an altar and promise his life to a woman who didn't exist. Not if I could help it. I woke at 6 a.m. on April 14th with the clarity that comes from irrevocable decisions. Today was my last chance to save Paul from the biggest mistake of his life. The evidence spread across my dining room table like pieces of a complex puzzle. 47 photographs arranged chronologically, 3 weeks of handwritten surveillance logs, background research on Floyd Brown and Leroy Smith, a timeline showing the systematic deception that had consumed a month of my life. The photographs told the story with brutal clarity. March 20th, Marilyn embracing Floyd outside Murphy's Tavern. March 27th, Marilyn kissing Leroy beside his Honda Civic. April 3rd, Floyd and Marilyn sharing dinner at an intimate Italian restaurant. April 8th, Leroy and Marilyn browsing engagement rings at a jewelry store downtown. Engagement rings. She was planning to marry at least 3 men. I created a presentation folder, organizing the evidence for maximum impact. The timeline went on top, a single sheet showing how she divided her week between 3 unsuspecting victims. Paul on Sundays and Mondays, Floyd on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Leroy on Wednesdays and Saturdays, Fridays reserved for work or family obligations. Next came the photographs with detailed captions, dates, times, locations, and context. Finally, the written observations documenting behavioral patterns that prove premeditation rather than impulsive infidelity. By 11 a.m., I had everything organized into a presentation that would demolish Paul's romantic illusions in 5 minutes. But presenting evidence was only part of my plan. I needed Floyd and Leroy to witness the truth firsthand. I spent 2 hours crafting messages designed to bring both men to the wedding venue during the reception. The approach required careful psychology, urgent enough to guarantee their presence, believable enough to avoid suspicion. To Floyd, "Floyd, this is urgent. Marilyn had an accident at Evanston Park near the wedding pavilion. She's conscious but shaken and asking specifically for you. Please come immediately. She needs you right now." To Leroy, "Leroy, emergency involving Marilyn at Evanston Park by the wedding area. She fell and hurt her ankle. She keeps asking for you by name. Please hurry. She's really upset and needs your support." Both messages exploited their genuine care for Marilyn, while positioning them to arrive at the wedding reception simultaneously. The truth would reveal itself without requiring explanation from me. The timing had to be perfect. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m., reception starting around 4 p.m. I would wait until 5 p.m. when guests were settled and celebratory, then send both messages simultaneously. 20 minutes later, Floyd and Leroy would arrive expecting to comfort an injured Marilyn, only to discover her celebrating marriage to another man. That evening, I sat in my study with the evidence folder beside me and my phone displaying both prepared messages. Tomorrow, at this time, Paul's marriage would be over before it truly began. The weight of what I was about to do settled heavily on my shoulders. In 12 hours, I would destroy my son's happiness to save his future. He would hate me, possibly permanently, but better his anger now than his devastation after years of marriage to a sociopath. I reviewed my plan one final time, checking for flaws or oversights. The evidence was irrefutable. The confrontation strategy was sound. The timing would maximize impact while minimizing Marilyn's ability to manipulate the situation. At 10 p.m., I locked the evidence folder in my desk drawer and went upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would be the most difficult day of my life, but also the most necessary. Paul deserved better than Marilyn Hayes. By this time tomorrow, he would know exactly what kind of woman he'd almost married. And if my careful plan worked correctly, Floyd Brown and Leroy Smith would finally learn the truth about the woman they both thought they loved exclusively. Sleep came easier than expected. My conscience was clear, my purpose resolved. The wedding ceremony had concluded flawlessly under the spring afternoon sun. Paul and Marilyn stood surrounded by congratulations, her white dress brilliant against the green backdrop of Evanston Park. I sat in the father of grooms section, the evidence folder pressed against my ribs inside my suit jacket. 50 guests moved from the ceremony area to the reception pavilion, their laughter echoing through the trees. Marilyn accepted praise with growing confidence, her hand possessively gripping Paul's arm as if claiming territory. "Such a beautiful bride," commented Paul's Aunt Eleanor. "You must be so happy to welcome her into the family." "Indeed," I replied, watching Marilyn's eyes catalog the expensive jewelry worn by our relatives. As the reception settled into its rhythm, Marilyn's behavior shifted noticeably. The demure facade she'd maintained during our previous encounters dissolved into something more aggressive, more entitled. "Paul's father has such a large house," she mentioned loudly to a group of family friends. "All that space for just one person seems terribly wasteful." "Oh, are you thinking of moving in together?" asked Cousin Margaret innocently. "Well, young couples need room to grow, don't you think? All those bedrooms just sitting empty." Marilyn's voice carried a calculating edge that made several listeners exchange uncomfortable glances. 20 minutes into the reception, she approached me directly. The crowd had thinned around the gift table, providing the privacy she needed for her real agenda. "Arnold, we need to discuss something important." Her voice held none of the sweetness she'd used during our dinner months ago. "Paul and I have been talking about our future living arrangements." "Oh?" I set down my champagne glass, meeting her gaze steadily. "Your house. It's perfect for newlyweds, and frankly, you don't need all that space anymore." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a more aggressive tone. "We'd like you to sign it over to us." The audacity took my breath away, even though I'd expected something like this. "I'm sorry, but that's my home. I won't be giving it up." Her face flushed with irritation. "Won't be giving it up? You're old and alone, Arnold. What do you possibly need all that space for? It's selfish to hoard resources when young families need them." "My answer is no, Marilyn. Maybe this will change your mind." The slap cracked across my cheek like a gunshot. The sound carried across the reception area, causing dozens of heads to turn toward us. My face stung, but I remained perfectly still, letting the moment register with every witness present. Paul materialized beside us within seconds, his face flushed with confusion and embarrassment. "What's happening here? Marilyn, why did you hit my father?" "He's being completely unreasonable about the house situation," she snapped, apparently unaware that assaulting an elderly man at her own wedding reception might not reflect well on her character. I reached calmly into my jacket and withdrew my phone, maintaining steady eye contact with Marilyn while Paul stared between us in bewilderment. "I think it's time everyone learned the truth about who you really are," I said quietly, my thumb moving across the phone screen. "What are you doing?" Marilyn's voice carried the first note of genuine concern I'd ever heard from her. "Making a couple of calls," I replied, sending the first prepared message to Floyd Brown. "You'll see." The second message went to Leroy Smith. Both texts identical in urgency, both designed to bring Marilyn's secret life crashing into her public one. "They should be here in about 20 minutes, I said, pocketing the phone with a satisfied smile. 20 minutes later, the sound of gravel crunching under tires announced the first arrival. A white pickup truck pulled into the park's small parking area, its driver clearly in a state of panic. Floyd Brown jumped from the cab and rushed toward the pavilion, his mechanic's uniform wrinkled from his hasty departure. Behind him, a silver Honda Civic appeared, disgorging Leroy Smith with equal urgency. Both men spotted each other immediately, their confusion evident as they approached the reception area, where 50 wedding guests watched with growing curiosity. "Marilyn," Floyd called out breathlessly, "I got your message about an accident. Are you hurt? Why are you wearing a wedding dress?" Leroy stopped short when he saw Floyd, his face creasing with bewilderment. "Wait, who is this guy? How does he know Marilyn?" The reception fell silent. Every guest turned to watch as two strange men interrupted the celebration, both obviously familiar with the bride in ways that suggested relationships far beyond casual friendship. Marilyn stood frozen in her wedding dress, her face cycling through shock, panic, and desperate calculation. Paul looked between the three figures as if watching a play performed in a foreign language. This isn't... You weren't supposed to... Marilyn stammered, her usual composure completely shattered. "How do these men know my wife?" Paul asked quietly, the word wife hanging in the air like an accusation. I stepped forward, withdrawing the evidence folder from my jacket with ceremonial precision. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Arnold Duncan, father of the groom, and I believe I can answer that question." Floyd and Leroy stared at me with matching expressions of confusion and growing dread. "Because I've spent the last month documenting this woman's lies to all three of you." "Three of us?" Leroy's voice cracked slightly. I opened the folder and removed the chronologically arranged photographs, holding them where everyone could see. March 20th. Marilyn with Floyd outside Murphy's Tavern. I displayed the first image, showing their intimate embrace in perfect clarity. March 27th. Marilyn with Leroy entering his apartment building. Floyd snatched the photograph showing Marilyn kissing Leroy, studying it with the intensity of a man watching his world collapse. April 3rd, Marilyn and Floyd at Giuseppe's restaurant. The romantic dinner photo passed between shaking hands. April 8th, Marilyn and Leroy shopping for engagement rings at Tiffany & Co. Engagement rings? Paul's voice was barely audible. 27 days of surveillance, I continued relentlessly. 47 photographs documenting systematic deception. She's been conducting 3 simultaneous relationships, while telling each of you that you were the only one. Leroy stared at the photograph of Floyd kissing Marilyn, then at Floyd himself. "You've been dating her too?" "Dating her? I thought we were exclusive." Floyd's voice rose to near shouting. "She told me she loved me." The revelation hit Marilyn like a physical blow. Her knees buckled and she collapsed to the ground, unconscious before anyone could catch her. Wedding guests pressed closer, everyone talking at once, the carefully orchestrated celebration dissolving into chaos and scandal. Paul knelt beside the photographs scattered on the ground, picking them up one by one, studying each image with the methodical attention of someone learning that his entire reality had been constructed from lies. "These are real?" he whispered. "All of this is real?" "I'm sorry, son. I wanted to be wrong about her." Floyd and Leroy stood together in stunned silence, processing their shared victimization. Both had been manipulated with identical tactics, identical promises, identical lies. "I can't believe we were both played like this," Floyd said finally. "A year of my life," Leroy replied. "A year of believing I'd found someone special." They looked down at Marilyn's unconscious form with expressions of disgust and betrayal, then turned away from the destroyed reception without another word. As their vehicles departed, Paul continued studying the photographs, his wedding dreams crumbling with each documented deception. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked the spring air. Marilyn regained consciousness to find the reception area nearly empty. Most guests had departed after witnessing the spectacular collapse of what should have been a celebration. She sat up slowly, her wedding dress rumpled and stained with grass. "Paul?" Her voice carried desperate hope. "Paul, where is everyone?" He stood 10 feet away, still holding the photographs that had destroyed his marriage before it truly began. Floyd and Leroy were gone, their tire tracks in the gravel the only evidence they'd ever existed in her carefully compartmentalized world. "They left," Paul said simply. "Everyone left." Marilyn struggled to her feet, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. "Paul, listen to me. This isn't what it looks like. I can explain everything." "Explain what, exactly?" His voice held a flatness I'd never heard before. "Explain how you were engaged to me while sleeping with 2 other men? Explain how you lied to all 3 of us for months? Those relationships didn't mean anything." She moved toward him with outstretched hands. "You're the one I chose to marry. You're the one I love." Paul stepped backward, maintaining distance between them. "Love? You don't even understand what that word means." Please give me another chance. I'll prove my love to you. I'll end things with them completely. End things with them? Paul's laugh held no humor. They already ended things with you. Did you see their faces when they realized they'd been sharing you with someone else? Marilyn's desperation shifted to anger as her manipulation tactics failed. Fine. You want to throw away our future over some stupid photographs? You're making the biggest mistake of your life. No, Paul said quietly. The biggest mistake of my life was believing you in the first place. He addressed the few remaining guests with quiet dignity. The wedding is canceled. Thank you all for coming. But there won't be a reception. Marilyn made one final attempt. Paul, think about what you're giving up. We had plans, a future together. Don't let your paranoid father destroy our happiness. My father saved me from a lifetime of lies. Paul's voice grew stronger with each word. If you loved me, you wouldn't have betrayed me with 2 other men while planning our wedding. She stared at him for a long moment, perhaps finally understanding that her carefully constructed deception had completely collapsed. Without another word, she gathered her skirts and walked toward the parking area, her high heels clicking against the pavement with mechanical precision. When her car disappeared around the corner, Paul and I stood alone among the abandoned wedding decorations. White ribbons fluttered from empty chairs, and the untouched wedding cake sat like a monument to shattered dreams. Dad, I owe you an enormous apology. Paul's voice shook slightly. You were right about her from the very beginning. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, son. I genuinely wanted to be wrong about her. Thank you. He picked up one of the photographs showing Marilyn with Leroy. Thank you for saving me from the biggest mistake of my life. That's what fathers do, protect their children from harm, even when it's painful. Paul studied the image for another moment, then set it down among the scattered evidence. I promise to listen to your concerns in the future. Really listen, not just dismiss them because I think I know better. And I promise to trust your judgment more than I have. I placed my hand on his shoulder. We both learned something important today. Together we walked away from the destroyed reception, leaving behind the white ribbons and abandoned cake, the scattered photographs and broken promises. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees as we headed toward the parking lot, father and son united by truth rather than divided by deception. Paul would recover from this betrayal. He was young, intelligent, and now wiser about the difference between genuine love and skilled manipulation. Someday he would find someone worthy of his devotion, and I would be there to welcome her properly into our family. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.